Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of mid-year highlights, looking at tracks that have come out in the last 6 months, with one from the band Eldamar. I've never heard of this group before. This comes off of their Astral Journeys Part 2 album that released back in April. This is called Akt IV, As I Pass Through the Veil. Let's dive in and see what Eldamar has in store for us today. Very interesting phrasing on that. We have a very clear 4-beat phrase and that delay at the beginning of the next bar, which gives us a 3.5 beat resolution to the melody. The dynamics on that are solid. Vocals are pretty much just white noise there, but I appreciate the clarity of the instruments. I'm looking forward to seeing what the vocals do once they actually have something more than just making sounds. Okay, I'm convinced that this is just what the vocals are doing. I think we're getting one syllable at a time, very slowly. And it's quite a melancholic beginning, though. This takes a more positive, upbeat turn. It's also warmer, less cold, particularly because of the resonant strings off to the side. So 14-beat phrase, 3-3-3-3-2. I wonder how all that divides to 7. Strangely enough, I felt like most of these sections are intros into a song proper. Just intro, 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 intro. They all seem to build into something that isn't where the next idea goes. really big guitars out to the side against the cleaner, more defined guitar in the center. Interesting shifting pulse there. Much like the intro, we were going in an odd number. The drums are staying even though. I'll discuss that later for more detail. Yeah, there's that shifting downbeat again. This crossfade idea is used a lot. Although this is a nice expansion of that previous section. And we're back to the 7/4, but with the odd grouping. it likes to return back to this home tone. And so it doesn't actually feel like we're progressing anywhere. Now we've got a progression going. Okay. Very bittersweet. Some sort of a completion of a task, a victory of sorts, but lots of loss along the way. This is such a long ending. Alright, I know there's still like a minute left. We're gonna have a pretty lengthy preface before getting into the analysis. I definitely need to get some stuff out of the way before I dig into my take on all of this. Okay. Preface time. I am listening to the peak of possibly, well, definitely at least a 2-album thing. This is Astral Journeys Part 2. If I go over to their page, I'm pretty sure they have a Part 1. Yeah, Part 1 came out last year. Part 1 has Act 1 and 2 on it. Part 2 has Acts 3 and 4 on it. Something else is that Act 4 is made up of 3 tracks. So I didn't get the 4 minutes leading into this, and I don't get the 1 minute that wraps this up, although the drone left and we just had the crackle of like a fire pit there at the end. So I'm not going to assume that the final minute in the track after this does much other than continue on probably that sampled atmospheric sound. But I am missing a lot of context here, not just the act that comes before it, not just the 4-minute intro to what we listened to, but also the entire album prior to this. This might be something that makes more sense once you've listened to the other, like, I don't know, hour and a half of music that precedes this. It's one of the tough parts when it comes to album closers, but especially double album closers, is that they expect this to wrap up a journey, and I didn't experience the journey. Sometimes that's fine, and the final song, it's both works well in isolation and to wrap up a larger work. I don't know if that's the case here. I have a fairly neutral to negative response to this track in isolation though, and I did want to clear up that maybe having listened to the rest of this might make this more impactful or purposeful or entertaining or anything. Honestly, I got very little out of this. The other thing I want to add to this is that all of what I'm about to say is my opinion. If you disagree with it, beautiful. Let me know in the comments your perspective. Just tell me that I'm trash or that I don't know what I'm talking about or any of that. I mean, whatever, man, if that's what you want to say, but it's not productive and it doesn't start conversation and it doesn't help me understand why you enjoy this or why this is great. So, back up your opinion. That's all I'm going to say. Let's get into it. The song kicks off with a really lengthy, slow burn opening. Has some neat ideas, feels like it's building towards something. And the next section kind of goes in a different direction, uses parts of where we were as a springboard to not leap in the same direction we were going, but to change direction entirely. A little bit of callback, a little bit of building from, but mostly doing something totally new. This section, neat ideas, great atmosphere. We've introduced a more metallic sound where the previous was a bit more melancholic. This one is a bit more aggressive, has a nice riff to it. We use this as a jumping board after building tension to start over somewhere new. It's still metallic. This one a bit more melancholic, feeling like it wants to call back the first section of this track. It is also cyclical and builds tension and is used as a jumping off point to go somewhere else totally new. This pattern doesn't really change on this track. Every section in here feels rather self-contained. Nothing builds off of one another. There's very, very few instances where I can hear a direct callback or reference to anything that came before. Instrumentation changes from section to section. Melodies and motifs change from section to section. I wish I could say that chord progressions change, but honestly, there's not a lot of chord progression change in here. We're going to touch on that later. This is a song that feels like a bunch of isolated moments, and the moments themselves are solid. I don't have an issue with many of these sections. Some I liked more than others based off of melody or riffage or instrument grouping, atmosphere. You know, we're all going to have favorites based on all sorts of random variables that come into play, not variables, parameters, when it comes into play with music and sonic art. But generally, I'm not going to say any of them were bad, though. But they just didn't do anything. And so often we used a crossfade. One section fades out and we bring in the next baseline riff. Maybe we hear a guitar fade in and then the whole band comes in after 4 bars of that or something. But the fade out is so overused on this. There are no endings on this track. No section actually has a finite point where you can say, okay, this is over. It just bleeds into another. Now, this could be thematically purposeful. The song is called As I Pass Through the Veil. The album is called Astral Journeys. The idea of smooth transitions between ideas and a lack of finality to any specific idea, I suppose that could work on an astral level. I'm not going to say that this is a bad idea to not have any sort of consistency throughout the song. And it could be much like jumping through memories, that things just sort of bleed together. You don't actually see the end of this memory. It just triggers another memory and you jump to that. That could be what this song is all about. And if so, beautiful. The thematic showcasing through the sonic art is well done, well executed. But I do think that there are stronger ways to show that sort of movement rather than just having a bunch of standalone vignettes that crossfade. There's no real transition between them. We just stop playing one and start playing another. But unlike the typical metal harsh transition, which is we were doing this, now we are doing this, you just kind of hear this vague overlap. Again, it works. I'm not going to say it's a bad choice. I just think that there's better ways to create fluidity through this. Instead of crossfading entire sections, you can crossfade specific ideas. Keep a guitar riff from the last one or a drum beat from the last one and allow it to fade over. Slowly reduce stems, reduce tracks, and add other tracks on top of it and have a gradual fade throughout. So it actually feels like things are melding and we don't have these static ideas. Usually when you have memories, there's the idea of, thinking about this place triggered this memory, or thinking about this person triggered this memory. There's going to be that thread that you can follow through your, I don't know, your memory trail. There is no thread between any of this. And again, I'm correlating memories to some sort of astral projection, and that can't necessarily be one-to-one mapped. But astral projection, I mean, it's tough to really know what that would look like. And so I think on both ways, I'm probably kind of right, where this should have had more of a thread that I could follow, but also it's an astral journey and I don't know what that looks like. Maybe this is it exactly, and I'm totally wrong here. Regardless, I think that this song feels very isolated. It is 17 minutes of single ideas, vaguely connected by crossfades, and nothing really feels like it goes anywhere. Everything builds to nothing, and it ends up being a very frustrating listen because of that. At least for me. Maybe you listen to this and you're like, this is beautiful, wonderful, best thing I've ever heard. Yeah, I mean, that's a valid opinion. This is just mine. I listened to this and all I felt was frustration and angst at the fact that everything builds and then that's just discarded. It's like, this is like Game of Thrones season 7, where every single plot thread is not followed through and it's just a bunch of plot holes in a story. It's not fun to listen to from my perspective. Here's the other thing though. The song moves a lot, as I mentioned, so many different ideas following each other, but each individual idea is hyper-focused on singularity. I had mentioned this particularly around minute 10 and showcased it a bit throughout the end of the track, but there's so many places where there's no chord progression because the chord will sit here, we'll have a couple of moving tones, and then we'll return back to here, then maybe a couple of moving tones, and we return back to here. The thing is, all the other notes are giving us information about the key, but the key notes are the ones that show us the progression. They're the ones that really highlight the emotional weight of what's going on. And most of the time, these keynotes are just the same tone over and over and over. I can't even call this cyclical because we don't have a progression to cycle through. This is just it all the time. This happens with melodies. When we had that quasi sax sound coming in, it might have been a saxophone. It kind of sounded like a saxophone, but it was so overshadowed by the rest of the metallic instrumentation that I'm not 100% sure about that. So if that horn solo in the middle wasn't a sax, please let me know. Don't eviscerate me though. But it comes in and it plays this wonderful little melody, short little phrase, a nice space for a breath, comes in and starts on the same note, goes in a different direction though. Okay, that's kind of cool. And started on the same note. And what could have been a wonderful melody that took us through some sort of narrative story ends up just telling a circle, the same thing that every other instrument's been telling. Now, expectation, reality. I am expecting melody in this song. Eldamar does not want to give me melody. I always feel bad about taking points away for this because it simply means that I'm expecting something from the art that it isn't, that it doesn't want to be, and that's not fair. This is probably just a place where what I appreciate in music and what I want in music isn't what the artist wants to deliver. There's just a mismatch between me as the audience and them as the artist. This is not music for me, and that's totally fine. But I really would have loved for some strong element of melody to appear anywhere in this track. And at best, we have melodic riffs that follow a melodic style of writing, but never follow through into that linear melody area. And so once again, anytime we get anything even quasi-melodic, it ends up just reinforcing this idea of singularity, of being stuck in a space. This, I think, is most showcased egregiously. I'd even say that this is a massive negative mark on the song for me in the final 4 minutes with the horns blasting. This should have been my favorite part. This is metal with brass. That's awesome. And to be fair, I thought the beginning of this was pretty awesome. We have these big brass sounds coming in, very victorious. I had mentioned that it felt like victory with melancholy, something positive, something negative. A task was finished, but we'd lost something along the way of completing it. Absolutely phenomenal way of crafting that feeling into the atmosphere of this. But then we have 5 minutes almost of hold a note, hit a different note, hold the note, hit a different note, hold the note. And it's just 5 minutes of this one sound, a couple of passing tones that sit around it, but we come back to this sound over and over for several minutes straight. And I cannot do that. That is frustrating. That is tension building without release. That is this entire song. Again, if that's intentional, artistically sound, fantastic. I don't like this though. From a purely subjective perspective, this was a very tough listen for me, constantly antagonistic to me, always putting a little treat at the end of a stick, and when I go to get it, they move the stick. Always training me to expect that there's going to be some sort of resolution or finality or movement or connectivity or anything, continuity to this song. And whenever they kind of give me the little bit of hope, hey, we actually might turn this into a song rather than a series of small one-off ideas, they don't. And I just found myself drained by the end of it. The silver lining here. This might be intentional, and it might be fantastically executed. The idea of passing through a astral veil might be very much a feeling of being stuck in several places, trying your best to try to get out of it to the next part of the veil and spinning your tires almost, making a lot of energy or wasting a lot of energy, but getting nowhere. Eventually, forcing your way through the threshold into the next moment, which doesn't really change anything. You're still fighting to press forward. By the end of it, maybe after crossing this veil, it's bittersweet. You've finally done it. You're finally through, but at what cost? Coming back out of the astral plane, you're by your fire, where you were meditating, and that's all you hear in the final 50 seconds of the song. After some drone going on, which I assume is the transportation out of the plane back to your physical body. It's possible that all the frustrations I have with this track, the feeling of being stuck in places and wanting resolution but never getting it, is the journey of the character in here as well. In which case, again, kudos to the band. Fantastic job at telling this story through sonic art. And this is the place where a possible academic read of it is going to be incredibly jarring against my subjective read of it. It could be a work of art, but one of those that I never want to interact with again, something that I just have such a strong visceral reaction to that I just want to run away from it. And that's where I'm at with it. This is either something that really could use a lot of work or something that's perfect. And that's always going to be up to the beholder of the art. There is one last piece to the puzzle, though: the lyrics. It's possible that this might clue us into what the music is trying to tell narratively, and that is going to have an impact on whether I think they succeeded with their music or need a little bit of help and could have used another draft. Let's dive into this and find out. Well, there are no lyrics? This presents an interesting thing. Metal Archives does not have any lyrics listed. Genius calls this an instrumental, which means that either A, the lyrics aren't documented anywhere and it's being mislisted as an instrumental, or incorrectly listed as an instrumental on Genius, or the vocal part doesn't have words to it, or if it does have words, maybe even in a made-up language, they're not designed to be translated, they're designed to be felt. Which means I need to approach the vocals like an instrument. And I have nothing to add to that at all. Maybe if I knew the lyrics in other tracks. Although actually Metal Archives doesn't have lyrics for any track on this album, so maybe Acts 3 and 4 are both instrumental. What about part 1? No lyrics on part 1 either. Here's where my frustration continues, is that the vocals are just vague white noise. If there was another timbre, another coloring to them, if there was pitch changes, rhythmic alterations to them, something that I could attribute to it, I might have something to add, but all they are is compression and white noise held out as a drone in some places of this song. I don't necessarily think they added much to the atmosphere. They certainly didn't add to the harmonic resonance because they're not pitched. They don't add to any of the rhythmic complexities in here because it's just one long held out note. So if they're not melodic, they're not rhythmic, and they're not harmonic, they're there for texture. And I don't think they added much by existing. I think the song would have probably been the same without them. And I would even go on to say that there's not a lot of room in the mix for them to begin with. They're very muddy and difficult to listen to alongside everything else as it stands. I kind of wonder why they're there at all. Obviously, I'm going to assume that the band has some sort of reason for it. They felt it was necessary. They heard the song without it and said, yeah, we need some guy growling right there. But I don't get it. As someone outside of the creation process trying to get this and failing wildly. My grasp of this track is either really strong, in which I understood everything and I felt the exact way they wanted me to, or I don't get this track at all and it's not my cup of tea, which is not a great thing to feel after listening to a song. However, though, as I stated during the preface, these are just my thoughts and opinions about this track. I backed it up with a lot of words and used a little bit of theory to explain why I felt the way I felt, but it's still just an objective view on it. Sorry, a subjective view on it. That's going to get clipped, isn't it? Bryan out of context claiming he has objective superiority over everyone else. Ah, geez. These are just my subjective thoughts on this track. What are yours, though? Did you enjoy it? Did anything stand out to you? Is there anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on if you felt I misspoke about something? What's your opinion, your take, your perspective on this? Let me know. Put it down into the comment section. I read every comment. I don't care if you're coming to this 10 years down the road, I'm still going to see your comment. Unless somehow I hit like 1 million subscribers, that's going to be a little difficult to keep up with everything. But as it stands right now, I read every comment. Let me know your take on this. I'd love to see if your opinion differs and if you can kind of shed some light onto what this song is trying to do and why it might accomplish that. Put that and any other thoughts you have down into the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.